Have you ever considered making your own skateboard deck? I did. Here's how it came out. When I was a kid, I was watching Future Primitive, the Second Bones Brigade video, and there was a part in there that really caught my eye. It was a behind-the-scenes tour of the Powell Peralta factory. They showed how skateboard decks are made. For me, as a kid, this was pretty eye-opening because up until that point, I never really thought about the fact that skateboards don't just materialize out of nowhere. There's actually people in a factory somewhere that make these things. The other thing that I realized is that if I had the right tools and the right materials, I too could make my own skate deck. Well, that was really appealing to me because I've always been a pretty DIY kind of guy. As a kid, I used to make my own yo-yos. As an adult, I have shaped and glassed some of my own surfboards. So when I started skating again as an adult, it only seemed natural that I would try making some skate decks. Today I'm going to show you the different skate decks that I've made so far, and this isn't meant to be a tutorial, but I will show you the steps that are involved in making a skate deck. Okay, let's take a closer look at the process of making a skate deck. Your starting point is going to be this. It's called an uncut blank. It's basically a piece of plywood with the contours already molded in. So you've got your concave and you have your nose and your tail kick. You can buy uncut blanks online from a variety of places. The two that I've used so far are skatepage.com and skateboardsforschools.com. This one is from skateboardsforschools.com. I think the biggest difference between the two is the concave profile. Skatepage is more symmetrical back to front, whereas Skateboards for Schools has more concave up by the front foot and it tapers off as it goes back. The reason for that is that they actually use the old Santa Cruz mold from the 80s. So that's pretty neat. I thought that was a cool selling point, especially if you're into classic shapes like I am. We'll see how it goes. Now you can actually go one level deeper with your DIY and create your own uncut blank. That involves gluing together the different plies, but it requires a mold and it requires some kind of press, a hydraulic press or whatever. I don't have either one of those things, so I was happy starting at this point. Once you have your uncut blank, here's the general process. The first thing that you want to do is draw a center line down the middle of the blank from nose to tail. If your blank is not pre-drilled for truck holes, now's the time to mark out where your truck holes are going to go. Then you want to trace the outline of the board onto the blank. You can either trace an existing skateboard or you can make your own template. Usually what people do is they'll create a half template and they'll trace half of it on one side of the line and then flip the template over and trace the other side. That helps to keep things symmetrical. The next step is your rough cut. You want to use something like a bandsaw or a jigsaw to cut out your board, staying on the outside of the line. You probably want to give it like a 1/4 inch or something like that, just so you don't cut into your desired shape. The next step is to fine-tune your shape. You want to use some kind of sanding device, maybe a drum sander or other electric sander, or you can do it by hand. You just want to bring that shape to the line. Of course, you want to keep the edges nice and square. The next step is to round the edges of your board. I happen to have a router, so I use that and it works great. If you don't have a router, don't worry. You can always sand it or you can use hand tools like a spoke shave, but the goal is to just smooth out that sharp edge. Next, you want to drill your truck holes. This is probably a time when you really want to pay attention and drill it nice and straight so that your board rolls properly. If you have a drill press, great. I don't, so I just use a hand drill and hope for the best. Finally, you want to fine sand your board. The idea is to sand off any pencil marks that you have and also sand out any scratches you have. So usually you want to start with a rougher grit of sandpaper and work your way to a finer grit. I usually start with something like 150 and then go to 220 and 320 and 400, and that's usually fine for me. Once you have fine sanded your board, you are ready for color and artwork. For color, I personally like to use wood stain because I like to see that wood grain through the color, but you can do whatever you want. Spray paint it, hand paint it, you can shoot it with paintballs, you could just leave it like wood and just leave it natural. For artwork, ideally, I would love to be able to silk screen I just don't have room in my house for silk screening equipment. You can hand paint it, you can spray paint it, you can stencil it, you can tape off and spray paint, Posca paint pens, Sharpie markers, shoot it with more paintballs, and finally, you want to spray your board with some kind of clear coat. I like to use clear acrylic. The idea is to protect your artwork and also to seal your board to protect it from the elements and keep it from absorbing moisture. For my first board, I made what I like to call my 80s bowl blaster. My goal was just to be able to cruise around some bowls on this and have a good time. The shape is inspired by those late 80s fish shapes. When I was a kid, I used to love going to surf shops because Town and Country surfboards had these really cool airbrushed geometric designs. I used to love those things, and I thought that it would be pretty cool to recreate that on my very first skate deck. I thought it would be a cool nod to my surfing background. The way that I got this artwork was to tape it off and to spray each color. So first I taped off this section and I sprayed the green, then I taped off this section and I sprayed the blue, and so on and so forth. I was really happy with how it turned out. All right, board number 2. I wanted to make myself a mini ramp setup. In particular, I wanted to relearn rock to fakie. That is a trick that I knew how to do when I was younger, but I found that as an adult, it was entirely too scary to learn. So I thought that I could hedge my bets a little bit if I shaped a board that was really similar to that board that I rode when I was younger. The one change that I wanted to make, though, is that the tail seemed kind of small on that board. So I wanted a wider tail and something a little bit longer. So I did that in my template and came up with this. The color is wood stain, and the artwork is my own custom hand-painted artwork that I painted myself. Now, I don't know how to paint, but my wife is a former art teacher, and she taught me how to do it, and this is what I came up with. It's a nod to the Pickerel Pool, which is a spot that I had skated a few months before painting this. Aside from completely butchering the truck holes, this board came out completely awesome. I love the artwork, and that's kind of part of the problem. I spent so much time hand painting this thing that I don't have the heart to set it up and skate it and trash it. So this has been permanently added to my collection. I've never skated it. I permanently retired board number 2, but I still needed to learn rock to fakie. So I made board number 3, which used the exact same template as board number 2. I did a general wood stain on here, kind of an abstract thing. I didn't put any artwork at all because I just wanted to learn the trick. And this board served me well. I learned rock to fakie on it. You can kind of see how much fading there is. This was the original color here, but it faded so much just from being out in the sun. One last thing about this board is that, if you recall, I made the tail extra wide and extra long because I thought that I wanted it that way. But when I finally rode it, I just thought that it was way too much tail. It wasn't really comfortable to ride. So I brought the board home and took my saw and just trimmed off a bunch of the tail. I didn't even take a whole lot of time to make it pretty. I just squared it off, and it was a much better rider that way. So that's the thing with making your own boards. You can experiment, you can make modifications to it. It's your board. Board 4 was a complete experiment. The first part of the experiment was I traced the back end of a board that I liked, and then for the front, I had been liking that whole pointy nose look. So I took some rubber tubing and I bent it into shape on one side, and then I traced it, and I bent it into shape on the other side, and I traced that. It actually came out pretty good. I think it's fairly symmetrical. The other part of the experiment was I coated the top with epoxy. I wanted to try laminating on some graphics. That's a technique that you use in surfboard building. It didn't really work out so great for me. In fact, it was a real mess with the epoxy. I did a terrible job with it, and I just sanded it off. But hey, it was an experimental board. I don't mind. I guess making mistakes is part of the process. I also experimented with wood stain on certain portions only, so taping it off and then doing a wood stain. The artwork on this is a doodle that I made of my dog jumping through a flaming hoop. The idea that I had in my mind is that if I could do some kind of air and get a picture of that, it would be cool if the artwork on my board was my dog doing something equally as dangerous, and it would also become like airborne artwork. The painting itself is done a little bit differently. Rather than blending colors together, I painted it more like a screen print would be, so painting solid colors in different areas. I only rode this board a few times. It goes great, so I should really probably take it out of retirement. For board number 5, I decided to revisit my mini ramp setup. Now, I had been riding this one, board number 3, for quite some time, and it was working out pretty well. But there were two things that bothered me. Number one was that there was no artwork on it. But the other thing is that it felt just too big and chunky. It rode like a tank. And for mini ramps, I like it to be a little bit more nimble than that. So I decided to shape something new. What I came up with was this, which is a more modern shaped deck, a little bit leaner, a little bit narrower, and this worked out amazingly for me. The color for this board is a gradient wood stain, so it goes from light to dark, and the artwork here is my pickerel cowboy from my second board. This was a total experiment. I took a picture of that painting, printed it onto rice paper, and then laminated it on with epoxy. It actually worked out pretty well. I don't think I would do it again just because it's a pain in the neck, but it did let me get my artwork on this board without having to repaint it. This board really turned out great. It's definitely my best one yet. I rode it for a long time on mini ramps. I eventually did get a different mini ramp setup, so I changed this over to be my crust rider. I put on some really nice soft wheels, and this is what I skate anytime that I skate ditches or the pickerel pool or any other spots out there in the wild. It really works great for me. Well, that's just about it for my DIY skate deck show and tell. Hopefully this inspires some other people out there to try making your own boards. If you take a crack at it, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. If you have any specific questions, feel free to leave a comment for me and I'll do my best to answer you. My name is Rob, signing off. Thanks for watching.